Well, businessman Tony Shepherd knows a thing or two about balancing the books. A former president of the Business Council, he's enjoyed extraordinary success in the corporate sector and sporting sector recently as well. And he's campaigned from time and time again for economic reform, including as chair of the Commission of Audit under Prime Minister Tony Abbott and then Treasurer Joe Hockey. Now, Tony Shepherd believes you have to make hard decisions in the national interest to make Australia a more prosperous place for future generations. For his take on last night's budget, Tony Shepherd joins me now from Sydney. Tony, you and I had a lot to do with each other during your time as the chair of the Commission of Audit. One of the opening statements read that as a nation, we have to have a responsibility to complete the task of budget repair. If we succeed, we'll remove the unfair burden on young people. Business as usual is not an option for Australia. We've got 8 years now on from that time. We've got net debt headed to almost $1 trillion by 2025. Does that worry you?
I've got to say I'm worried about the trajectory of the deficit going forward and the fact that we won't have much in reserve if something else should happen to us over the next few years. And who knows in this volatile world what's going to happen. I noticed, like this morning, for example, interest rates went up by 20 points on the back of the announcement, sort of thing. So we can't assume that forever we're going to have very cheap or low cost money. I think interest rates could go back on the rise again at any time, but nobody can sort of predict if and when that might happen.
No, no one can predict no one can predict a pandemic as we went through. We know it's always out there in the ether, could well happen, but we never know when it's going to happen. We know another global shock's likely. It is, that's the history of economics, but we can't predict when that will happen. No one could predict precisely the fallout from the GFC. You're right to point to that as an ongoing worry. What got us through last time, and indeed what's helped the government this time, is the budget's been in some fair state of repair, if not fully back to surplus. We are now in deficits until 2032. So we're spending more than we're earning until 2032. We've got the GFC, you've just talked about that, obviously. What about the conflict in our region or another pandemic? That's the real worry. We haven't got much in the tank. Yeah,
well, look, it's, as you say, we're living in an increasingly volatile world and you need to build your reserves. And the fact that the government actually had repaired the balance sheet and the budget coming into this crisis gave us that tremendous capacity to quite rightly pour cash into the economy to keep things running and to help the people that had been significantly disadvantaged by the pandemic.
Give me a sense. We talk a lot about infrastructure, and I know it's politically popular and makes good economic sense. There's a lot of infrastructure announced in this budget. There's been a lot of infrastructure announced almost for the last decade, but it's slow to get built. And I go to the issue of water infrastructure. It's in every single budget, but I can't tell you a dam that's been built in the last 30 years. Are we actually going to get these promises done and implemented?
Well, look, I think that's a very important question. I chair Infrastructure South Australia, for example, and we're focused very heavily on making sure that these projects do get underway as quickly as possible. The immigration restrictions, of course, make it difficult at times to bring in skilled labour or skilled engineers, those sorts of people. But I've got to say that the government is moving on that now, and we have been able to bring in the necessary skills we need to do these projects. But they are having an impact. By 23 in New South Wales, a lot of these big projects will be finished and open, and I think people will be absolutely amazed at them and what the impact is on the economy and on people in general.
I remember when you chaired the Audit Commission and you said to me one of the things that worried you as a businessman is to look at the balance sheet and see how much there was recurrent spending. We saw over $200 billion announced as a recurrent yearly spend on welfare, around 50 on education. It's all baked into the budget. It's money that's very difficult to cut. So you've just got to keep growing the economy to give yourself headroom to spend in other areas. Do you think we're up for a tough conversation about reform in order to claw back some of that recurrent spending? Or politically, Is talking to the Australian community about reform too hard?
Look, I've got a lot of respect for the Australian voter. I think they are, in many respects, the most intelligent voters in the world, and they understand the concept of you cannot indefinitely spend more than you're taking in. I don't think they're fools. I don't think the Australian voters are fools. They'll take it if they can get it, but they're not fools. I think with government programs, we've got to start adopting a more rigorous approach of analysing each of these programs and making sure they are delivering the goods.
Yeah, look, you're spot on. Often they get rolled over, Tony, you and I know, because the political pressure from lobby groups come on the government as opposed to the program doing everything it should. And if a program's good, it should almost write itself out of the budget books over time. Anything in the budget that wasn't there that you would have liked to see the government deal with?
We are awash with liquidity in Australia and throughout the world. There is capital trying to find a home. So the asset write-off for small and medium businesses is good, but I would be looking at what Trump did, which was accelerated write-off across the board for all businesses. And before the pandemic hit, he'd got unemployment in the United States down to 3.5%, which was a record low. I can't remember the last time US unemployment got so low. So I think, we need to be able to tap into the private sector, because the private sector employs 80% of the population of workers and also is, in fact, the economy. So my view would be I would have had a good look at accelerated depreciation or asset write-off across the board for all businesses, because I think we need to tap into that investment. And Australia is regarded as a great place to invest now. We're probably one of the safest countries in the world from a pandemic point of view. We've got a good education system, we've got a first-class health system, and we have the rule of law. So it's a time, I think, where we could really attract foreign capital if we can make it more attractive to invest.
Thanks for your time, Tony Shepherd, and your insights.
Thank you. My pleasure.